William the Conqueror, born around 1028, was the first Norman king of England, ruling from 1066 until his death in 1087. He was also Duke of Normandy from 1035. A descendant of the Viking leader Rollo, William spent his early years fighting to secure control of Normandy. By 1060, he had firmly established his power. After the death of King Edward the Confessor of England in 1066, William claimed that Edward had promised him the throne. When the English noble Harold Godwinson became king instead, William built a fleet, invaded England, and defeated Harold's army at the Battle of Hastings on 14th October 1066. This victory marked the beginning of the Norman conquest of England. He was crowned king in London on Christmas Day that same year. William's early life was difficult because he was born illegitimate, the son of Duke Robert of Normandy and his mistress Herleva. As a child, he faced rebellion and chaos among Norman nobles who fought for power. He proved himself a strong ruler after crushing a revolt in 1047 and spent the next decade strengthening his rule. His marriage to Matilda of Flanders brought him powerful allies and helped him secure influence over the church by appointing loyal bishops and abbots. By the early 1060s, he also took control of the nearby county of Maine, expanding his influence in northern France. After becoming King of England, William faced several rebellions, but by 1075 his control over the kingdom was secure. He introduced major changes, building castles, redistributing land to his Norman followers, and reshaping the English nobility and clergy. Although he ruled both England and Normandy, he treated them as separate lands. In his later years, William faced conflicts with his eldest son, Robert, and threats of invasion from Denmark. In 1086, he ordered the creation of the Domesday Book, a detailed record of land ownership in England. The next year, while fighting in northern France, William was injured and died. He was buried in Caen. After his death, his territories were divided. Normandy went to his son, Robert, and England to his son, William Rufus. The Norsemen first began raiding the coast of what later became Normandy in the late 700s. By the early 900s, some of these Vikings had settled there permanently. Around 911, the Viking leader Rollo made an agreement with King Charles the Simple of France, who granted him the lands around Rouen. This area became the center of what would later be known as the Duchy of Normandy. In the following centuries, Norman ports were used for new Viking attacks on England, which created tension between the two regions. To improve relations, the English king Ethelred the Unready married Emma, the sister of Richard II, Duke of Normandy, in 1002. Despite this alliance, Danish raids on England continued. In 1013, Ethelred fled with his family to Normandy when King Svein of Denmark invaded England. After Svein's death the next year, Ethelred returned, but his rule was soon challenged by Svein's son, Cnut. When Ethelred died in 1016, Cnut became king of England. Ethelred's sons, Edward and Alfred, fled to Normandy with their mother Emma, who later married Cnut. When Cnut died in 1035, his son Harold became king of England, while Emma's son Harthacnut ruled Denmark. England fell into disorder, and Alfred was killed when he returned to visit his mother. After Harold's death in 1040, Harthacnut became king, and when he died in 1042, Edward returned from exile and was crowned King of England. William was born in 1027 or 1028 in Falaise, Normandy. He was the only son of Duke Robert I and his mistress, Herleva, the daughter of a man named Fulbert of Falaise. Although his parents were never married, William was recognized as Robert's heir. Herleva later married Erluin de Conteville and had two more sons, Odo of Bayeux and Robert of Mortain, who later became important supporters of William. Robert became Duke of Normandy in 1027 after the sudden death of his brother Richard III. The duchy was unstable at the time, and Robert faced both noble rivalries and outside threats from Brittany. He managed to gain support from key Norman lords, including the Archbishop of Rouen, and several powerful families. Robert also supported the exiled English princes Edward and Alfred, keeping close ties with England. In 1034, Duke Robert decided to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Before leaving, he called a meeting of Norman nobles and made them swear loyalty to young William as his heir. Robert died the next year on his way back from his journey, leaving the child William as the new Duke of Normandy. When William became Duke of Normandy, he was only about 7 or 8 years old, and his illegitimate birth made his position difficult. He was supported by his great-uncle, Archbishop Robert, and by King Henry I of France, which helped him keep the title. However, after the archbishop's death in 1037, Normandy fell into chaos. For several years, nobles fought for power and control over the young duke. Many of William's guardians were killed, and his life was often in danger. Some stories say that his uncle Walter hid him among peasants to protect him. Despite the disorder, the Norman Church and some local leaders remained loyal to William. In 1046, several Norman lords rebelled against him, led by Guy of Burgundy. William escaped an ambush and fled to King Henry for help. The next year, they defeated the rebels at the Battle of Valais-Dune near Caen. This victory allowed William to take stronger control of Normandy, though it took him more than 10 years of fighting to bring peace. He introduced the Truce of God, a rule limiting when nobles could fight, trying to reduce violence. William continued to face opposition. He defeated Guy of Burgundy and exiled him in 1050. He then joined King Henry in a war against Geoffrey Martel, Count of Anjou, to stop his growing power. William managed to capture important castles at Alençon and Domfront, strengthening his position. However, by 1052, King Henry turned against him, fearing William's growing independence. A series of battles followed. In 1054, the king and the Count of Anjou invaded Normandy, but William's army defeated them at the Battle of Mortemer. 3 years later, he won again at the Battle of Varaville, ending the invasions for good. By 1060, after both King Henry and Geoffrey Martel died, William had become one of the most powerful rulers in France. One of the most important moments in William's rise was his marriage to Matilda of Flanders, daughter of Count Baldwin V. Their marriage, arranged around 1049, strengthened his political position, as Flanders was a powerful ally with ties to both France and Germany. The Pope at first opposed the marriage, but it was later accepted, likely after William and Matilda founded 2 monasteries in Caen, as an act of devotion. The marriage was happy and successful, producing several sons and daughters, and it greatly improved William's reputation among Europe's rulers. There are no real portraits of William, but written descriptions say he was tall, strong, and broad-shouldered, with a deep voice. He was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, and known for his great physical strength and endurance. He loved hunting, and was an excellent horseman and fighter. Though sometimes criticized for being harsh and greedy, he was admired for his faith and discipline. His marriage to Matilda was loyal and affectionate, and he remained faithful to her, a rare quality among medieval kings. William was not very interested in books or learning, but he tried to learn Old English later in life before giving up. Above all, he was a determined and capable ruler who turned a dangerous childhood into a life of power and conquest. William ruled Normandy with a system much like that of earlier dukes. His government was simple, based around his household, which included officials such as stewards, butlers, and marshals. He traveled across his lands to approve documents and collect revenues. Most of his income came from his own estates, market tolls, and small taxes. He maintained close ties with the church, attending councils and appointing loyal bishops, including his half-brother Odo as Bishop of Bayeux. Another important advisor was Lanfranc, an Italian monk who became one of William's most trusted churchmen. Under William's rule, Normandy saw a great religious revival, with many new monasteries founded, including 2 built by William and his wife Matilda in Caen. Around 1051, William may have visited England to discuss the royal succession with King Edward the Confessor, though it is uncertain if this visit happened. During this time, tensions rose between King Edward and his most powerful earl, Godwin of Wessex. After a political crisis, Godwin and his family were briefly exiled, and Edward reportedly promised the English throne to William. However, when Godwin returned with an army in 1052, Edward was forced to make peace, and William's supposed promise of succession was left uncertain. Meanwhile, William focused on strengthening Normandy's borders. He claimed the nearby county of Maine in 1062 after its count died, and secured it by 1064. He also campaigned in Brittany, reducing its threat and gaining Breton allies who would later join his conquest of England. In England, Earl Godwin died in 1053, and his son Harold Godwinson became Earl of Wessex. Harold's brother Tostig became Earl of Northumbria, but a rebellion in 1065 forced him into exile. King Edward, now old and ill, died on the 5th of January 1066. English sources say that Edward named Harold as his successor, and he was crowned the next day in Westminster Abbey. However, William of Normandy claimed that Edward had already promised the crown to him, and that Harold had sworn an oath to support him. Other rivals also appeared, including Harold Hardrada of Norway, who claimed the English throne through an old agreement with a previous king. To defend against invasion, Harold gathered troops along the southern coast during the summer of 1066. Meanwhile, William prepared for war. He held a council with his nobles and convinced them to support the invasion of England, promising them rewards. He also sought the blessing of Pope Alexander II and was said to have received a papal banner for the campaign. William's wife, Matilda, governed Normandy while he prepared his army. Throughout the summer, William gathered a massive fleet and army in Normandy. Chroniclers exaggerated the size, but it was certainly large. His forces included Normans, Bretons, and warriors from France and Flanders. Bad winds delayed the fleet for several weeks, keeping it in port until late September. During this time, Harold had kept his army waiting along the English coast, but by early September, with the harvest season approaching, he dismissed his troops. William then prepared to cross the English Channel, ready to begin the invasion that would change England forever. In September 1066, Tostig Godwinson and the Norwegian king Harold Hardrada invaded Northumbria and beat the local earls Morcar and Edwin at Fulford near York. Harold Godwinson rushed north, crushed them at Stamford Bridge on the 25th of September, and both Tostig and Hardrada were killed. 2 days later, the Norman fleet finally sailed. William landed at Pevensey on the 28th of September, moved to Hastings, built a quick castle, raided nearby lands, and waited for Harold to come south. Harold left part of his army in the north and hurried to meet William. He paused in London for about a week, then marched roughly 200 miles to the Hastings area. William's scouts spotted him, and on the 14th of October the armies clashed at Senlac Hill. Harold's men stood in a solid shield wall, and at first threw the Normans back. Breton troops wavered, some English pursued, and Norman cavalry cut down the pursuers. William rallied his army and used feigned retreats to break the English line. By afternoon, Harold was killed and English resistance collapsed. The next day, Harold's body was identified, and later tales disagreed about where it was buried. Expecting surrender, William advanced methodically instead when England did not yield. He secured Dover, Kent, Canterbury, and Winchester to control the treasury and his line back to Normandy. Skirting London, he burned as he marched, crossed the Thames at Wallingford, and received the submission of leading nobles. He entered London, ordered a castle begun, and was crowned at Westminster on Christmas Day 1066. William tried at first to work with native leaders. Edwin, Morcar, and Waltheof kept their titles, and Edgar the Etheling was treated cautiously. But the families of Harold and his closest supporters lost their lands. In 1067, William returned briefly to Normandy, leaving Odo of Bayeux and William Fitzosborne in charge, backed by new castles and many English sheriffs left in office. Resistance flared at Dover, Hereford, and Exeter. William besieged Exeter for 18 days, took it, and built another castle. Harold's sons raided from Ireland but were beaten off. Matilda joined William in England and was crowned in 1068. Revolts spread. Edwin and Morcar rose in 1068. William marched through their lands, built castles at Warwick, York, Nottingham, Lincoln, Huntingdon, and Cambridge, and forced submission. In 1069, Edgar the Etheling and a Danish fleet captured York. William raced north, bought off the Danes, and broke the rebellion with a harsh campaign known as the Harrying of the North, burning and devastating the countryside before Easter 1070. He then received papal legates, was ceremonially crowned again, and reshaped the English Church. Stigand and other native prelates were deposed. Lanfranc became Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas of Bayeux took York, and Norman clergy filled most top posts. William also founded Battle Abbey at the Hastings site. Danish raids resumed in 1070 and joined with the rebel Hereward the Wake at the Isle of Ely. But William forced the Danes to withdraw, built causeways into the marshes, and subdued the area. He invaded Scotland in 1072, compelled King Malcolm to make peace, and turned back to the continent to secure Maine in 1073. Although his grip on England was firm enough to leave for long periods, enemies abroad encouraged Edgar the Etheling and stirred trouble in Brittany and France. While William was away in 1075, Ralph of Norfolk and Roger of Hereford led the revolt of the Earls. Norman commanders bottled Ralph up in Norwich. The Danes arrived too late to help, and the revolt collapsed. Waltheof was later executed, and William stamped out further resistance. He suffered a setback at Dole in 1076 against the French king, but soon recovered. Worse was a family rift. His eldest son, Robert, rebelled after being denied authority. In 1079, Robert's supporters held Gerberoy, and in a sortie, Robert unhorsed William, forcing a withdrawal. Peace was patched up the next year, with Robert once more recognized as heir to Normandy. Fresh troubles followed. Scots raided Northumbria in 1079, sparking a local uprising and the murder of Bishop Walcher. William returned, sent Robert north to build the new castle at Newcastle, and reasserted control. He rejected a papal demand to hold England as a papal fief, visited Wales in 1081 to assert power, and dealt with unrest in Maine by negotiation. In his later years, the record thins. In 1082, he arrested his half-brother Odo, likely for overreaching ambitions and meddling with William's vassals. In 1083, Robert rebelled again with French backing, and Queen Matilda died, a heavy personal blow. Rebellion in Maine dragged on around Saint Suzanne. Meanwhile, a Danish invasion threat in 1085 led William to levy Danegeld and keep forces ready through 1086. But the danger faded when King Nut of Denmark died. Throughout, William held England with castles, a reorganized church, and firm rule, while constantly riding the line between English affairs and continental wars. William strengthened his rule in England by building a dense network of castles, keeps, and mottes. The most famous is the White Tower in London. Early forts were mostly earth and timber, later rebuilt in stone. These strongholds let Norman garrisons control the countryside and gave them safe places to fall back to during local uprisings. At first, Norman lords kept small groups of household knights. Over time, these knights were granted their own lands, a process called sub-infeudation. William also required his great lords to provide fixed numbers of knights, not only for campaigns, but also to staff castle garrisons. This system replaced the older English habit of calling military service by territory. After years of revolt, most leading Anglo-Saxon families lost their estates, which passed to Norman and other continental nobles. Not every companion of William became rich in England. Some refused lands in a realm that still looked unstable. Sometimes one Norman received scattered estates once held by several Englishmen. In other cases, William bundled holdings around a new castle to make a compact, controllable block. Writers claimed William cleared and depopulated a wide area to create the Royal New Forest for hunting. Modern research suggests the scale was exaggerated. Much of that region was poor farmland and lightly settled already. Even so, William loved hunting and spread harsh forest laws that controlled who could hunt and what animals could be taken. William ruled each of his lands separately. In Normandy, he remained a vassal of the French king, but in England, he recognized no superior. Each territory kept its own administrative habits. England continued to use royal writs and its own legal formulas, which differed from documents issued in Normandy or Maine. He took over England's shire system, with sheriffs in charge of royal justice and revenue. To govern such a wide realm, William traveled constantly between England and the continent and appointed trusted deputies, often his half-brother Odo or his wife Matilda, to act in his absence. He also kept collecting the Danegeld, a land tax usually set at 2 shillings per hide, but raised higher in emergencies. English coins stayed high in silver and were regularly reminted. Norman coins were poorer in silver and quality. The two money systems remained largely separate. William's vast personal estates made him by far the largest landowner in England. He held the former royal lands and much of the property taken from Harold's family. In 1085, he ordered a kingdom-wide survey of land and resources. The result, known as Domesday Book, lists who held what before the conquest, and in William's day, along with values, taxes, and resources. It covered nearly all counties south of the Tees and Ribble. By August 1086, the returns were in, and the leading men swore the Salisbury Oath of Loyalty. The survey likely served several purposes, including fixing feudal duties and improving taxation. Late in 1087, during a campaign in the French Vexin, William fell ill or was injured while taking Monte. He died at Rouen on the 9th of September 1087 and was buried at his abbey in Caen. He left Normandy to his eldest son, Robert, England to his son, William, and money to his youngest son, Henry. Disorder followed his death, and even his funeral was troubled, but his remains were finally interred in Caen, where the grave has been disturbed and restored several times over the centuries. William's death set off a long struggle among his sons over England and Normandy. The wider impact of his conquest was immense. The church was reshaped, the nobility was remade, the language and culture of the court shifted toward France, and England's ties with Scandinavia faded. Historians still argue over how sudden and deep these changes were. Some praise William as a founder of England's later strength. Others see him as the author of a harsh foreign yoke. What is clear is that his rule fused Norman and English practices into a new system that shaped medieval England.